The slap echoed across the terminal. Sharp, sudden, unmistakable. Conversations froze mid-sentence. A coffee cup slipped from someone's hand and shattered across the polished airport floor. Security scanners hummed in the background, but for one suspended second, the entire concourse felt like it stopped breathing. A uniformed airport officer had just struck a young woman across the face, and he had no idea who she was. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't pushed back, hadn't caused a scene. She was standing calmly near the security checkpoint at a busy international terminal, dressed casually, phone in hand, backpack over one shoulder. The officer had been agitated already. Long shift, crowded lines, delayed flights. Someone ahead of her had argued about a carry-on bag, and tension hung thick in the air. Step aside, he barked. I'm just waiting for my ID to be scanned, she replied softly. Don't talk back. I wasn't. The slap came before she could finish. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Because even in chaos, some lines are never meant to be crossed. Her hand slowly rose to her cheek. Red fingerprints bloomed against her skin. Phones came out. Whispers began. Did he just hit her? For what? Is he serious? The officer straightened his uniform, trying to reclaim authority. You comply when I tell you, he snapped. But something shifted in the energy around him. People weren't intimidated. They were watching. And the young woman? She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She looked at him steadily, disappointed, more than anything. Her name was Sasha Obama. But in that moment, she was just a quiet traveler trying to catch a flight. A woman near the gate leaned toward her friend and whispered, She looks familiar. Another passenger squinted. Wait, isn't that? The officer didn't notice. He was too focused on asserting control. You think you're special? He muttered. Sasha inhaled slowly. No, she said calmly. I just expect respect. That answer only irritated him more. You get respect when you earn it. The irony hung heavy. Airport supervisors were already moving toward the commotion. Security cameras captured everything from multiple angles. A bystander approached cautiously. Sir, that wasn't necessary. The officer shot him a glare. Mind your business. But it had become everyone's business the moment his hand crossed that line. Sasha's phone buzzed. She glanced down. A simple text. Landed. The sender, Dad. Minutes later, the sliding doors near arrivals opened. And the atmosphere changed. Because walking through that terminal, calm, composed, surrounded by quiet presence, was Barack Obama. No sirens. No shouting. Just gravity. The kind that enters a room without needing to announce itself. He saw her immediately. A father's eyes always do. He noticed the red mark before she said a word. He walked toward her with steady steps. What happened? He asked softly. She hesitated. Before she could answer, the officer stepped forward, trying to maintain authority. She was being non-compliant. Obama turned his head slowly and looked at him. Not angrily. Not loudly. Just directly. Non-compliant, he repeated. The officer stiffened. Yes, sir. Sir. The words slipped out instinctively. Recognition was dawning. Too late. Obama reached up gently and examined his daughter's cheek. Did he strike you? He asked quietly. She nodded once. The surrounding crowd fell silent again. Because now the weight of the situation had doubled. The officer swallowed hard. I was maintaining order. Obama's gaze never left him. By hitting a young woman? No raised voice. No theatrics. Just a question heavy enough to crush pride. Airport management arrived quickly now, faces pale. Mr. President, one of them began nervously. Obama lifted a hand slightly. I'm not here as a president, he said evenly. I'm here as a father. That sentence hit harder than any shout could have. The officer's posture shifted. Confidence evaporated. Because he realized this wasn't about status. It was about accountability. Witnesses began speaking up. She didn't do anything. He was aggressive from the start. I recorded it. Phones were offered forward. Evidence undeniable. The officer's earlier bravado faded into something brittle. I thought she was being disrespectful, he said weakly. Sasha spoke calmly. I said I was waiting. Obama nodded slightly, then looked back at the officer. You thought force was the answer? The officer had no response. Supervisors escorted the officer aside. Internal affairs was called. Statements were taken. The terminal buzzed with controlled chaos. But at the center of it stood a father and daughter. Obama turned to Sasha. You okay? She gave a small smile. I've had worse days. He smiled back gently. That's my girl. Reporters began gathering outside within the hour. News travels fast when power and injustice collide. But inside the terminal, something more important was unfolding. The officer was brought back forward, not in cuffs, but stripped of certainty. He stood before them, hands clasped tightly. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt forced at first, then heavier. "I shouldn't have done that." Obama studied him carefully. "Why did you?" The officer exhaled shakily. "I lost control." There it was. The real issue. Control. Obama repeated thoughtfully. "You wear a badge," he continued. "That badge represents authority. Authority without control becomes abuse." The officer's eyes dropped. "I understand." "Do you?" Obama asked quietly. "Because understanding isn't about words. It's about change." Sasha stepped forward slightly. "You embarrassed yourself more than you embarrassed me," she said calmly. The officer flinched. Not from anger. From truth. The supervisors confirmed immediate suspension pending investigation. The crowd slowly dispersed, murmuring about what they had witnessed. But the lesson lingered. Outside, cameras flashed as Obama and Sasha exited together. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Obama, any comment?" He paused briefly. "Respect shouldn't depend on recognition," he said. And that was all. Days later, footage surfaced publicly. The outrage was immediate, but so was reflection. The airport issued a formal apology. The officer released a statement acknowledging misconduct. Mandatory retraining policies were announced. New de-escalation programs implemented. Because sometimes one incident exposes a deeper flaw. Weeks passed. Sasha returned to her routine: studies, travel, quiet independence. The red mark faded, but the moment didn't. One evening at dinner, she asked her father something unexpected. "Were you angry?" Obama considered the question carefully. "Yes," he admitted. "But anger is loud. Leadership is steady." She nodded thoughtfully. "I didn't feel small," she said. "I felt watched." He smiled gently. "Because you handled it with dignity." Months later, something surprising happened. The former officer requested a meeting. Private. No cameras. He sat across from Obama and Sasha in a quiet conference room. "I've been in counseling," he began. "Training. I needed to understand why I reacted that way." Silence. "I let stress turn into aggression," he admitted. "And I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it." Sasha listened calmly. Obama leaned forward slightly. "What have you changed?" "I pause now," he said. "Before reacting, I ask questions instead of assuming." "Growth. Real growth." Sasha finally spoke. "Don't ever forget how that felt," she said softly. He nodded. "I won't. Because regret is only meaningful when it leads to reform." The story could have become a scandal. It could have become rage. But instead, it became something else. A reminder. That power must answer to principle. That authority without empathy collapses. And that sometimes the strongest response to disrespect is composure. That was the weapon no one saw coming. Not a fist. Not a badge. Not a yell. Just calm. Steady. Unshakable. The officer sat in the airport's small conference room, hands clasped tightly, staring at the polished table. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, but he barely noticed. He replayed the moment over and over. The slap, the red mark, the phones, the whispers, and then that quiet, powerful presence walking through the terminal. The presence of Barack Obama. Not loud, not aggressive, just authority shaped by decades of discipline, intellect, and patience. The officer finally understood. This wasn't about rules. This was about respect. Real respect. Meanwhile, Sasha sat quietly in a corner of the terminal, watching the officer squirm under supervision. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. She hadn't needed to fight back. The calm her father had embodied had already made its point. Her hand, still slightly sore, rested gently on her cheek. It stung, yes, but it was a reminder. A reminder that strength wasn't about who could hit harder or shout louder. It was about who could maintain control when chaos erupted. The airport supervisors had gathered everyone involved. Witnesses, staff, and passengers who had recorded the incident were asked to provide statements. Cameras from the terminal's security system captured the entire sequence, every step, every reaction. The officer's regret deepened with every frame he saw of himself. He hadn't just embarrassed himself. He had humiliated a young woman in front of an entire terminal. And worse, he had almost harmed someone whose life he had no understanding of. Obama stood quietly behind Sasha during the debriefing. He didn't need to speak loudly. His presence alone carried authority. The officer's eyes kept flicking toward him, as if hoping the former president would deliver a reprieve. But Obama didn't give him an out. Not yet. Instead, he let the weight of the situation speak for itself. "You had a choice," Obama finally said, voice calm, but sharp enough to cut through the tension. "You could have asked questions. You could have de-escalated. You chose force, and now you must live with the consequences." The officer swallowed. His throat felt dry. "Yes, sir," he admitted quietly. "You will undergo retraining," Obama continued. "Mandatory de-escalation. Counseling. Reflection. You will learn that authority without empathy is nothing but abuse. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," the officer repeated, voice barely above a whisper. Sasha glanced at her father. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. The tension in her chest began to ease. She realized something important. The world didn't need her to fight back in that moment. Her father's calm authority, the kind born from a lifetime of leadership, was far more powerful than any retaliation. She nodded slowly to herself. The next day, the airport issued a formal public apology. The incident was covered widely in the media, but the narrative wasn't about scandal. It was about accountability, responsibility, and the power of measured response. The officer released his own statement. He admitted misconduct. He promised to undergo retraining. He promised to never let impatience dictate his actions again. It was a small step, a public acknowledgement. But the internal shift, the one he couldn't put into words, was even more profound. Weeks later, Sasha's routine returned to normal. She traveled, studied, and lived her life quietly. But she carried the lesson of that day with her. Strength isn't loud. Strength isn't physical. Strength is awareness, restraint, and the courage to maintain composure when chaos threatens to overtake reason. And sometimes, the world doesn't need you to prove your power, it only needs you to show it. The officer, meanwhile, began his retraining in earnest. Every scenario, every de-escalation exercise reminded him of the day he lost control. He had expected fear,